Sorry to delay you guys. I was bumped from another session, and I'll be switching focus as well. I'm going to be talking about product counterfeiting. So, right. I wanted to start with this image of what looks like an innocent dry cleaning facility in downtown Canal Street in New York, where 6 years ago when I used to be in-house counsel I was there for nearly 20 years as lead anti-counterfeiting counsel for the Swiss luxury goods group Richemont. And I was also head of IP litigation. Anyway, we were raiding this dry cleaning facility, which turned out to launder more than just clothes. In a hidden back room, we found that they had, in a 2-year period, conducted illicit checking transactions for the trade in counterfeit watches, in particular in Chinatown in New York, totaling more than $52 million. That's right, $52 million in a 2-year period. So this was the culmination of a series of raids we conducted, where we closed down some 300 or 400 websites, all focused in the United States. And I wanted to talk to you about how the counterfeiting landscape has changed dramatically from the time, even at the turn of the century. And even as we speak, the change seems to be the order of the day with social media websites. There's a lot of counterfeiting activity going on those sites, which we haven't really come to terms with. I'll be speaking on the subject for those who are interested in Bombay in about 10 days' time at an INTA seminar, so you're welcome to attend that if you like. One thing that has happened in these past 15 years is that I believe the counterfeiting problem has completely gone out of control. According to the WTO and to other statistics tossed out by the ICC, and that's the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, and the World Customs Organization, they estimate the trade in counterfeits as representing between 5 and 7% of overall global trade in products and services. But consider this slide from a suspiciously named person called Felix Salmon. I did a quick web search. He actually exists. It's not just a fishy name. He makes the point that somehow, apparently he called many of these different organizations to find out where these statistics came up from, the 5 to 7% magic figure. And everyone pointed to somebody else saying, oh, we got it from them, or we got it from that organization. There was no real scientific basis as to how these figures came about. Well, one thing is true though, however you quantify the problem, the situation is now so rampant, whereas I estimated that, and this was backed up by WTO statistics again, whereas about 20 years ago there were some 60 countries affected by the trade in counterfeit products. These are the only places I would say, I'm sorry, the highlights haven't come out well, I'd say it's the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the Antarctic and the Arctic, where we've found no cases yet of counterfeit products. Okay. Meanwhile, the quality of products gets increasingly better day by day. So you now have high-end fakes, whether in the online context or off, where you just don't know whether what you're dealing with is authentic or not. There was a famous case in the Second Circuit, the Third Circuit in the United States a few years ago, where Gucci sued a discount chain store called Daffy's for having sold very high-end copies of their famous Jackie O line. It turns out that Daffy's had actually taken the trouble to deliberately damage 1 or 2 bags, and they sent it to a Gucci boutique in New York City, I believe. The bag was repaired without any questions being asked, and it so transpired that only one person, and that was the head of quality control at Gucci's factories based in Florence or wherever it might be, he was the only person able to determine whether or not, in fact, it was fake. So the court had no hesitation tossing that case out, even though ignorance of, as we all well know, ignorance of whether something is counterfeit or not doesn't really give you much protection. Anyways, when fakes are of such a good quality, it's even more important for brands to take this problem very seriously and to try to do all that they can to fight the problem. The internet, of course, has made the situation that much more complex. This is a famous cartoon which came out a couple of years ago where a dog is surfing and saying to his buddy that on the internet, if you're online, nobody knows you're a dog. So it's not just the internet, but also the rise of China as the workshop of the world, which has really contributed towards this huge explosion in the availability of fakes. You can now, anybody with a PC can now launch himself or herself as a counterfeiter, sell products, and deliver it anywhere around the world on a 24/7 basis. The anonymity and global reach afforded by the internet has changed the nature of the game in so many different ways. First of all, fakes and the counterfeit industry has become a scale enterprise where you can quickly accumulate scale and mint vast amounts of money just by having a simple website. In the old days, this was not possible. It wasn't easy for a tout or a little retail outlet in Hong Kong or in Taipei to accumulate this kind of scale because brands would quickly come to clobber you. Along with scale has come a sophistication in operations. For just as the internet has enabled legitimate business to function in a seamless manner, so also it's enabled counterfeiters, the bad guys, who are now very well versed in financial flows, in technology. They can move goods from one country to the other, have it outsourced to half a dozen other countries. And by the time law enforcement realizes what's going on, products have been shipped and delivered and sold and lots of money made in a completely illicit way. So our reaction time is not as speedy as it used to be. Peter alluded to this, albeit in a different way, especially in the context of the internet. Users seem to have a anything goes attitude. People won't have any hesitation downloading films or music without paying for it, for example, whereas they would hesitate to shoplift. So, faced with all this as in-house counsel or as counsel providing advice to brands, one has to keep up and try to adopt a different strategy in order to fight the problem effectively. I just wanted another quick slide. I'm going to try and speed things up because I know people must be getting rather hungry. You do a quick search for fake Ferragamo, for example, one of my clients. You have more than 3 million hits. On the other hand, you have an attitude. Richemont had bought, my previous employer, a brand called Shanghai Tang. Bought it from this gentleman called David Tang, who had the audacity to write in the South China Morning Post a few years ago in an editorial saying that if the whole business of piracy and counterfeiting in China is worth billions and billions of dollars, a huge population must be dependent on it. Sorry, the quote got cut here. He goes on to say that he loves living in Hong Kong and especially visiting Temple Street. That's where you can still buy a lot of fakes in Hong Kong. He says, Temple Street lends a distinctive style to the kind of Hong Kong I like. It's enterprising, individualistic, ethnic, and slightly illicit. Half of Temple Street exudes more style than the whole of Disneyland. So his point was essentially that while the Chinese government could, if it so chose to, just in the same way as it cracked down, say, on the Falun Gong movement, if they want to do something about counterfeiting, they could, but they won't because it could create a sort of social problem in the sense that there's right now people who are unemployed can, I suppose, occupy themselves in the counterfeit industry. So before considering what measures one could take to effectively fight the problem, let's see what some of the traditional options were. Sometimes people lobbied for better legislation, but especially after the TRIPS agreement, I believe policymakers by and large have what I've called, post-TRIPS fatigue. Nobody wants to deal with this on the legislative front anymore. Another issue is that by the time you actually get legislators to make up their mind, the TRIPS negotiations, for example, took about 9 years. I think the current round, is it the Doha round? I've lost track. It has been going on with no end in sight. So by the time you actually have a multilateral framework in place, or you try to develop something like the ACTA, what does the acronym stand for? The Anti-Counterfeiting Treaty. The situation on the ground may have changed effectively. You could try and persuade the police or customs and other authorities to step up their enforcement measures. But they're also, especially in this terrorist-obsessed world, and understandably so, law enforcement have other priorities than to deal with product counterfeiting issues. They have, in addition to terrorists, the drug trade, murders and so forth. They prefer to, if you will, leave the problems to brand, to police their rights themselves. You could have consumer education campaigns, but there again, and that's the skeptic in me too, Peter, I don't know about you, but when I try, even in my own circle of friends, to convince people not to buy fakes, they'll say, oh, it's because you're an IP lawyer, you represent the IP side of things that you feel the way you do. The rest of us, if we can get something for free, why not? And besides, genuine products cost far too much as it is, excuses like that. There was a study done. I'm not aware of any recent studies, but this was at the cusp of the century. The Union des Fabricants, an anti-counterfeiting group in France, established that in a survey of several households in France, that the likelihood of your purchasing a fake product increases with one's level of education and income. So much for trying to educate people. I favor more hard power options, to borrow from Joseph Nye. What does this mean? Oh, sorry, before I get there, I wanted to just touch upon an approach that I do not favor. Mr. Giorgio Armani essentially went to bed with people who were copying his products. He said he went to China to try and clobber some of them, but he's found the quality of the fakes so good that he actually licensed them to start producing for him. So, what about effective enforcement? Know who you're dealing with. Let's start with the internet. I'm now an IP entrepreneur. One of the firms I have, Strategic Intellectual Property Information, based in Singapore and Delhi. We provide, and we are the only Asian company to do this, information on what's going on in the internet, who might be behind Udo.com selling, fake Armani products, for example, which companies, who's behind this, enabling brand owners to then take effective action against counterfeiters. We believe in following the money trail. We have an artificial intelligence program whereby when we remove counterfeit products, say on behalf of brands from eBay or from Taobao, what looks like maybe 5 or 50,000 different users turns out very often to be 5 or 10 people with multiple email addresses and accounts on those auction sites who then represent roughly 60% or even more, or sometimes, of the counterfeit business. We try then to follow the money trail as well. Whilst at Richemont, rather than focusing on seizing product, we tried to get hold of computer records from those 300 or 400 websites we seized, analyzed it. The trail then led back to Canal Street, where we were able, for the first time perhaps in our enforcement effort, to shut down and effectively understand the totem pole of supply within which these two rival gangs of counterfeiters were in fact organized. Try and pursue criminal remedies wherever possible. And although it's not always easy and it's not always effective, our first success in closing down a website in 2000, nobody remembers this case anymore, but those days it was the biggest such case of its kind. Somebody operating under the name of fakegifts.com bragged on his web pages that he's his own service provider, that he's making so much money, that he wants to put up many more sites, and that brands couldn't catch him because they don't know what to do, where to find him. We actually managed to put him in jail, but he was a very audacious chap. He sent me a letter from prison saying that you've made an internet martyr out of me by having placed me in jail. He said, I'm studying the law. You should have gone after the manufacturers and not me. And he essentially asked for what amounted to a big bribe, saying that if he didn't pay it when he came out of prison 2 years later, he changed the internet into a virtual Chinatown. So I'll conclude on that note. Don't despair, fight hard, and don't be too retro. Okay, thank you.